The self that can acknowledge is where we start from when we notice what we need, and that's waking up. And that's waking up. Waking up and notice what I need. Waking up and notice where I am. Waking up and notice myself. Ah. Mm. Ah. Mm. Ah. Mm. Ah. The self that notices is the ni. It's almost like a word for a pauper, ani, the one who doesn't have. But the whole self that I am starts with a big wide and notice implicit at the end of that is something like an H. Do you hear it? Ni. Ni. This is the self, implicit in all blessing. Because blessing is about acknowledging the other, right? As the self. Like a blessing without a self, it's still great, But how do you talk about it? Where do you come from? But this is part of the curse, right? Making the blessing smaller by talking about it kind of defeats the purpose when the purpose is the experience of the whole. And it's a challenge to have language for a self that doesn't really feel like the answer or even make space for the better thing. Chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom. And this is only because it happened once upon a time. Not even so long ago, like 200 years ago, right? 200 years ago, there was a Rebbe, the Chozo of Lublin. And he was troubled by the world and sought refuge in just knowledge of the God. The world is so much what it is, but the God, who knows what it is? Who knows? And the more you listen, the more you start to get a sense. But the more you love the God, the more you might not love just where the world is at. There's a bit of an integration challenge between love of the pure, perfect, good thing, whatever that is, source of sources, and everything that seems to interrupt that. There is the complete commitment to co-identifying them, sure, but that's a little, bit of a step as opposed to just raw identification either with or against, right? So, troubled as he was, the young Yaakov Yitzchak found himself praying with his whole heart, having discovered the mysteries, having begun to learn the deeper Torahs around the whole thing, where Yaakov Yitzchak started to just get really into them, really love them and spend time with them for hours. And then he'd be a little confounded about the world and what to do about it. It was very confounding for him. And one time in the morning, he wakes up and he starts doing the first morning prayer, which theoretically is Modeh right? Before prayers, there's prayers. You don't have to say this one. This is a skippable one because it was made later on, but that makes it the most important one for people who like the guys who made it. And the whole Kabbalistic tradition really is adapting the blessings that do demand to be made as loud as possible with the ones that can't even be said in words, you know, breaks my heart to want to give examples, but blessings depend on being clear. And before anything is clear, who can you bless? What can you bless with? Before your hands are clean, how can you even focus, you know? And so for a long time since, and I looked it up today, when is this even from? Because it's very much universal canon nowadays. It's one of the first things all the preschools give over because it's the first thing. But apparently it's never mentioned before the 16th century. In Tzfat, a master named Moshe ben Machir, he was not part of the other schools. His school was a normcore school, Talmud Halacha, downplayed mystical secrets, was not really, even despite being a mystical secret town. Um, but he wrote a book called the Seder Hayom, the Order of the Day, describing just, you know, every day. First printed in 1599 in Venice, and again in 1605 in Venice. And now it's everything, you know. Deeply embedded here is a tradition that has been in Sfat the whole while. A way to start without starting. Mode ani. You know, one would think the mode ani. I really appreciate it. Mode ani. I can't help but notice. Mode ani. I can't help but notice it. I can't help but acknowledge. Mode ani. Lefa necha. Melechai. Vekayam. Mode. I can't help but acknowledge. Ani. I. The I that couldn't help but acknowledge, right? You could just skip the word I. But the word I is very grounding. But once upon a time, do you know what happened? This one guy couldn't say it. You know, there's a lot of prayers you don't necessarily want to say. A lot of liturgies, you know, a lot of reasons to skip things, you know. It's always a good reason to skip something, you know, if only to keep doing the other thing. But once upon a time, the very first thing in the morning that Rav Yaakov Yitzchak, who would become the main sort of head of the school and head of the whole movement and head of the whole charismatic movement in Poland, in Warsaw, you know, in Lublin, the Chozo of Lublin, you know, the Sierra, couldn't be there with the I. There was no Ani. Modeh. The acknowledgement is so big, and let us say, can be broken down. One little acknowledgement, pre-grammatical. Modeh. In this one word is some parts, right? The center of the word modeh is the dalid. It really is the core of it, because lehitvadea is really a vav root, vav dalid, right? It's really vav dalid, vidui, you know, an acknowledgement that is a confession that insists that you know. Vad is the one who sees and assembles together to acknowledge, and this is knowledge itself. Da'at, you know, once it's known. But to make known, levadot, lehodia, lekol vador lenivoshu, you know, to make known. Modeh. Really, you'll notice in the devotion, the vowels are what speak. The mem at the beginning just kind of rolls, because acknowledgement and affirmation rolls like water. It just rolls. Modeh. It's hard to do a long at the beginning unless you're really trying to, right? Unless you're making a long practice out of it, right? Which is, the fundamental water, the fundamental kindness. Mm, the great mother, the big 4-0. And also a maximalist version, right? That's like 700. Mm, but notice how tertiary that is to the word I'm saying, mode. It's so brief to stop at the beginning because the ode is what I'm doing, right? Mode, 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 mode. We say this when we're acknowledging something. Let's say I was wrong, right? Right. Acknowledge something. I mode. Yeah, I think you're right. I was wrong. Every day, every morning, just acknowledging Mode Ani Lefanecha. I acknowledge before you, right? I acknowledge before you. Before meaning before your face. Lefanecha. Before your change. Lefanecha. And let us please acknowledge who and what you are. Right? And this is the formula. Mode ani lefa necha. This is not a secret. This is the beginning of every prayer book since the 1600s, going every which way. Melechai. We wake up for a living God. Melechai. A living king, a living sovereign, a living reality, a living ruler, a living life, a life that rules. Melechai. And is Bekayam. And there is that again. And notice how much easier it is to lean into that at the end of a word than at the beginning of the word. Mode ani lefanecha melechai vekayam vekayam. Right? What kind of God is a real God? I guess today we'll see. Vekayam. What kind of God is a real God? Right? One you can already feel in your mouth, in your heart, in your body, in your blood, in your stomach, on your tongue. Kayam. Real, fulfilled. Kayam. But one morning, Rav Yaakov Yitzchak, the Choser of Lublin, did not feel very fulfilled. He just took his time. They make it sound like hours, but who can say? He was before people were around a lot. He was under a lot of supervision near the end, and not enough supervision, from what I'm told. One morning, and he had some disaster prayer mornings. He had one where he just similarly couldn't. But in this one, he sure could just be there with that first part without trusting the demand inherent in the second part. Mode. Acknowledge. Mode. Acknowledge. Mode. Right? He's almost going to try to say it, who it is that acknowledges. He's going to try to say it. Who is it that is acknowledging? It's but he could not say it. think, I suspect, he could lean into that first. But the downfall, the nefilah into the ni of ani, the go of the ego, right? Just the e is fine, but the go is a bummer, right? A ni. No. For hours until eventually he did get there. Mode ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Mode ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Mode ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Shehechazarta bi nishmati. Bechem Rabba emunatecha, who gave me back my selfhood, my deepest selfhood. Because there's a part of the self that is, you know, more than Ani. It's Ani Shama, the self that heard, the self that breathes into. That's already bound up in the divine other that all encompasses. The neshama that you give back to me. Shehechazata bi nishmati, in me, bi nishmati, my breath in me, nishmati, bechem la rabba emunatecha, in tremendous love, your faith, how much you seem to believe in me enough to keep breathing in and out of me. Your faith that keeps this engine alive. How does Yaakov Yitzchak get on with it and find himself? The same way the high priest on Yom Kippur did, noticing how much the whole really does love this little part that I get to be. Your faith in me to be. And your hope and trust that I'm going to keep listening for a better way and trying to hear and acknowledge what you want me and us to hear and acknowledge. Mode ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Mode ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Shehechazata bi nishmati. Bechem l'rabba emunatecha. Shehechazata bi nishmati. Right? The self you give back that I lose track of every time I lose track of and come back to every time I come back to, with you there, with me there. Bechem l'rabba emunatecha. Blessings with codes to follow. Welcome.